head coach Stephen Silas spoke about the developments just a couple moments ago. Take a listen.
I am aware that he was getting his test today here in Houston, and so that leads to the fact that he is here, and that's pretty much all I know right now. It's kind of there's some moving parts to it, I assume, but him getting tested in Houston is good for everybody. You know, trust is built day to day, and once the relationship begins, then we'll begin that process of trust. The good thing that I have here, and one of the reasons that I was so excited to get this job, is like we're not in a rebuilding situation. You know, ownership and Rafael have done a great job of putting a really good team together, adding John Wall, adding Cousins, adding Wood, and now adding James to that is still very exciting.
Stephen Silas, by the way, for a rookie head coach, very impressive throughout these whole last few days. And I want to welcome in our ESPN NBA reporter down in Texas, Tim McMahon, who's been right on top of this story. Judging from what you heard from Silas and company today, when do the Rockets expect to see James Harden at practice?
Well, that depends on when he clears the NBA's COVID protocols, and Stephen Silas isn't quite sure. But obviously the good news for the Rockets is James Harden is in Houston. He did report to the Toyota Center, so the process has begun to getting him cleared to be able to practice with the team. And, you know, the Rockets all along anticipated that this would happen at some point. Of course, they thought he'd be there for the start of camp, and they thought he'd be there yesterday.
Imagine that.
A couple days late, little Vegas vacation. Hey, little Vegas vacation. In some ways, it's, quote, James being James, but obviously with the situation of him having requested to be traded, it is different than some of his previous Vegas vacations, his annual post-All-Star stop in Vegas and miss a practice situations.
And I always like to point out for the people watching that, quote, holdouts, they don't work in the NBA. They don't work the way they would in the NFL. An NFL player can hold out and the clock on his contract continues. He's just not getting paid. In the NBA, the clock on your contract doesn't start until you report. So holding out doesn't do anything for a guy because it just pushes his attachment to the team that he might be holding out from for even longer. He can ask for a trade, though, and you reported the addition, Tim, of the Sixers to Harden's list of trade targets. What is the Rockets' reaction to this, especially since the man that they would be dealing with to make this trade would be Daryl Morey, who told them that he wanted to take a year or so off from basketball. They let him out of his contract, and a week later it turned out that he wanted to take what you have called it a gap week instead of a gap year, and showed up in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and look, is it maybe awkward if they get into serious discussions? Sure. To be clear, to this point, there have not been any real significant discussions between the Rockets and Sixers. And what Harden has said is, look, Brooklyn is still his preference. He would certainly be open to the Sixers or other contending situations, but there's just a short list of teams that fit both his criteria of a contender, and that can also give the Rockets the, you know, franchise cornerstone and bundle of either young talent or draft picks in return. And obviously that's where you get to the 76ers as a partner that could make sense. Important to note, however, Daryl Morey has been absolutely adamant that he is not interested in breaking up that duo of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. And obviously, if you're talking about a young franchise cornerstone, if one of those guys aren't coming back to Houston, there's no discussions to be had.
Yeah, and look, Tim, we talked about the fact that you can't really hold out, right, in the NBA. And I loved your reporting at the beginning of all of this when the reports were out that Harden wanted to trade, and then you talked to the Rockets and they said that they were willing to get uncomfortable. What kind of message do you think James Harden has been trying to send these past few days about how uncomfortable this might actually get in terms of what they ask for or wish for? Oh, we've lost him. I don't know. I can ask our guys about what message James Harden has been trying to send. I'll bring back in Richard Jefferson and Kendrick Perkins here. Guys, as I said to Tim and started to talk about, he said, hey, the Rockets said, hey, we're willing to get uncomfortable. Well, there was a reporting date for the Rockets, and James Harden was first in Atlanta with Lil Baby, and then he was reportedly in Las Vegas. What message do you think that he's been trying to send?
I think that James Harden is okay with being uncomfortable also. I think that's the message. He's like, yo, that's fine. You guys can be uncomfortable. I'm okay with making this uncomfortable. Now, this is the thing. Is there a level of professionalism that you want all players to have? Yes, but I think James, if he's behaving like this, then you have to believe that he has communicated to them that he does not really want to show up to camp, that he would prefer to be traded before camp starts. And so if they didn't take that in and they're saying, listen, you're under contract, you have to show up, then he's like, okay, well, I'm going to show up on my own time. And this can continue to get uglier on both sides, not just on his side. So hopefully they can come up with some sort of agreement.
Well, it's interesting, RJ, that you brought up that James Harden and the Rockets have communication. It's a lack of communication that was going on. And it started from the top of the hiring of the GM and the hiring of Steve Silas. From my understanding, it didn't get the approval from James Harden. But with that being said, you still have to show up to work. And I think James is at fault, not for requesting a trade or wanting a different scenery, but for him not showing up to work. Like, this is your job. You get paid to do it. Always look back on the Anthony Davis situation, and Anthony Davis, although he wanted out and wanted to go to LA, he still showed up to work every day. And also, this is a learning situation for Tillman Fertitta also, that you have to have great communication with your franchise guys moving forward, especially when Daryl Morey left the organization. So right now it's just a big mess down here in Houston. I don't know how the locker room could accept all this right now, but let's see how it goes. I see Stephen Silas is doing a great job, by the way, of handling all this.
Absolutely. Who would you guys say has the leverage right now in this situation? Because James still has 2 years left on his deal. But as we've seen, it can be disruptive if a player doesn't want to be somewhere. What do you think, Richard?
I don't think anyone wins in these type of battles. I don't think anyone wins. I think James Harden obviously, gets affected in the public perception. Again, there was already a public perception about, his partying and stuff like that. I'm not going to say that this man isn't a professional and didn't approach, we know he's one of the best players probably to ever walk the face of this planet. But when you're out doing that, when training camp is supposed to start, then that just adds to the public perception. And that actually generates money, whether you're talking about shoe sales, whether you're talking about further contracts. And so I think with the Houston Rockets, they have a little bit of leverage, like, hey, we're going to make you show up. But what message does that send to future free agents if you're unhappy? So this is one of those things that everyone loses in this situation. And it's best if you can't sit down, if Tim can't sit down and have a conversation with James Harden. And if they can't leave that meeting with an idea that he's going to start and see how this goes, then they have to have the conversation about how you can move on from him and try and get your team as much assets as possible.
Right. And Rachel, to answer your question, who has all the leverage? All the teams that's going to be calling in has the leverage. Because if I'm Philly or I'm the Brooklyn Nets, guess what? The package that I would have presented 3 weeks ago, I'm not forced to present that package now because of how James Harden has carried and handled this situation by not reporting. He's almost forcing his hand, which is going to force the Rockets. And so now they're going to have to be forced to take anything. With 3 weeks ago, they probably could have got back a Ben Simmons or something to that nature with some picks. But if I'm Daryl Morey, for example, and I'm the Philadelphia 76ers, I'm holding tight. I'm offering them a package, but it ain't including Ben Simmons.
And look, some of the emotions involved here, too. We know how James feels right now, or we certainly have gotten indications of that. But look, once he gets into it, James is known as a workhorse, right? He's been an Ironman for the Rockets. He loves playing basketball. They've had a hard time getting him to sit. So I know one of the things the Rockets are banking on is that once he gets into it, whether it be training camp or actually starting to play games and plays with John Wall and plays with Boogie Cousins, that it might